I have owned more land than 3 counties combined. I have signed papers that moved cattle by the tens of thousands and money by the millions, and I have shaken the hands of men who could buy a small nation before breakfast. None of that is the reason you are reading this. You are reading this because of a plate of eggs. Cold eggs, if I'm being precise, and half a biscuit that had gone hard at the edge, pushed across a Formica counter by a woman who did not have the eggs to spare and gave them to me anyway. She thought I was nobody. She thought I was worse than nobody, a man at the bottom of something, which I was, though not the way she imagined. And in the space it took her to slide that plate 2 feet across a countertop scarred by 40 years of coffee rings, she did something that all my money never had. She saw me, and then she fed me. I have spent a long time trying to decide whether I owe her everything or whether that word is too small. I still don't know. But I know how it started, and I know how it ended, and I know the part in the middle where I almost ruined it by being exactly the kind of man she'd have been right to walk away from. So sit down, let the coffee go cold if you want. This one's worth the whole cup. The ice came in off the caprock the way it always does out there, not falling so much as arriving, sideways, mean, riding a wind that had come 600 miles without meeting a single tree tall enough to slow it down. I remember the sound before I remember anything else. Sleet against the window glass of that bus station like someone throwing gravel by the handful, patient and endless, and under it the tick of a radiator that had given up sometime around Reagan. I was sitting in the corner of a Trailways depot in a town I won't name, because the woman still lives near there, and she has earned her privacy from me 100 times over. Call it a town on the edge of the Llano Estacado, where the land stops pretending to be anything but flat, and the sky takes over the whole job of being enormous. I had a duffel bag that cost $11 and a coat that had cost me nothing because I'd taken it off a hook in my own barn on the way out. And I had in the front pocket of that coat a leather ledger about the size of a paperback book with a rubber band around it to keep it closed. I want to tell you about the ledger because you can't understand me without it. My father kept one. He traded cattle across the Panhandle and into New Mexico back when a handshake was a contract, and a lie followed you into every sale barn from Amarillo to Roswell for the rest of your life. He wrote everything in that ledger. Every steer, every dollar, and this is the part that mattered to me as a boy, every kindness. If a man let him water his horses, my father wrote it down. If a widow gave him supper when his truck broke down on the Mescalero Road, he wrote it down, and the next time he came through he left something on her porch and he crossed the entry out. Paid, he'd write beside it, not in the sense of money, in the sense of made even. A debt you don't record, he told me once, is a debt you've decided to forget. And a man who forgets what he owes, he said, isn't poor, he's just cheap in a way that doesn't show yet. I was 58 years old sitting in that bus depot, and I had carried on his habit for half a century. I had ledgers going back decades in a fireproof safe at the ranch. Everything I owed, everyone I owed it to, and beside almost all of it in my own tight little hand, the word paid. There was only one entry I had never been able to cross out. My wife's name was Alina, and she had been dead 11 weeks. I'm going to say that plainly one time, and then I'm going to let it sit the way it sat in me, like a stone you swallow that never comes back up. 11 weeks. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed in the spring, gone by the first cold snap, 40 years of marriage folded up and put away between 2 hospital visits. I had a house with 14 rooms in it, and I could not be inside a single one of them without hearing her not there. So I did what a coward with money does, which is I ran, except I didn't take the plane or the good truck or any of the men who worked for me. I put on the old coat, and I took a bus, and I told my ranch manager I'd call in a week, and I disappeared into my own country like a stone dropped in a stock tank. I wanted to be nobody. I had spent my whole life being somebody, and it had not saved her, and it was not saving me, and some animal part of my brain had decided that if I could become small enough, anonymous enough, ordinary enough, then maybe the grief would lose track of which man it was chewing on. It doesn't work, I can tell you that now. But I didn't know it yet, sitting in that depot at 9 o'clock at night with the ice coming sideways and $31 in my pocket, because I had left the credit cards, all of them, in a drawer at home. That was the whole point, a rich man's superstition. I wanted to know what I was worth with none of it. I found out. The depot had a lunch counter along the back wall. 6 stools, most of the stuffing coming out of 2 of them. A hand-lettered sign said hot food, though the griddle had clearly been cold for hours. And behind the counter a woman was scrubbing at that griddle with a pumice stone and a kind of grim rhythm. The way you clean something not because it's dirty, but because your hands need a job while your mind chews on a problem. That was Ruth. She was maybe 40. Hard to say, she had the kind of face that trouble ages fast and then leaves alone, so she could have been 35 with a bad decade or 50 with good bones. Brown hair pulled back and coming loose. An apron over a waitress uniform that had been washed so many times the pink had gone to the color of the inside of a shell. She wore a man's flannel shirt over it against the cold, sleeves rolled, and on her feet were the kind of white orthopedic shoes that tell you a person has spent 20 years standing on concrete. There was a bandage on her left thumb. She kept catching it on things and wincing and not complaining, which I noticed because I notice things. It's a rancher's disease, watching. You watch a herd long enough, you start watching everybody. The bus I was supposedly waiting for wasn't coming. I knew that. The dispatcher had come out an hour before and told the four of us scattered around the depot that the highway north was closed at the county line, glaze ice, and nothing was moving till the sun came up and the road crews got out. The other three had left, two into a waiting car. One walking off into the storm with his collar up like the cold was a personal argument he intended to win. That left me. Me and Ruth and the radiator ticking, and the ice throwing itself at the glass. I had not eaten since a gas station in the morning. A candy bar and a coffee, and I'll be honest, the not eating was partly the money and partly that grief kills your appetite dead. But the body doesn't care about your reasons. Around 9:30, my stomach started up loud enough to hear across the room, and Ruth looked up from her griddle. "Kitchen's closed," she said, not unkind, just tired. "Grill's cold and I already cashed out the drawer." "That's all right," I said, first words I'd spoken aloud in about 6 hours, and my voice came out rusty. "I'm fine." She looked at me a second longer than a stranger looks at a stranger. I have thought about that look 10,000 times. I know now what she was doing. She was pricing me. Not for money, she was checking whether I was dangerous, whether I was drunk, whether I was the kind of trouble a woman alone in a bus depot at night learns to smell coming. And I watched her decide I wasn't. I don't know what tipped it. Maybe the coat. Maybe that I hadn't moved from my corner, hadn't come sidling up to the counter, hadn't done any of the things the dangerous ones do. Maybe just that I looked to her, like a man who'd been hit by a truck and was still standing there wondering where it went. She went back to her griddle, but she didn't scrub. She stood there a second with the pumice stone in her hand, and then she set it down. "You waiting on the north bus?" she asked. "I was. It's not coming. I heard. Where you headed?" I opened my mouth to lie and found I didn't have one ready. "Nowhere in particular," I said, which was the truest thing I'd said out loud in 11 weeks. She nodded slowly, like that was an answer she'd heard before and understood better than I wanted a stranger to understand it. Then she reached under the counter and came up with a paper sack, the brown kind, folded over at the top and gone soft with handling. She set it on the counter. She looked at it. And then, and this is the part, this is the whole thing, she pushed it toward the empty stool nearest me and said, "You might as well eat something. Griddle's cold, but this doesn't need a griddle." "I couldn't take your supper," I said, because I could see what it was. A woman doesn't fold a paper sack that carefully unless it's the only one she's got. "You're not taking it," she said. "I'm giving it." Different thing. And she almost smiled, and the almost smile cost her something. I could see it cost her. And she turned away to give me room to be a man who'd say no with dignity or a man who'd say yes with dignity, one or the other. I came to the counter. I sat down on the stool with the stuffing coming out and I opened the sack, and inside was exactly what I told you at the start. 2 eggs, fried hard and gone cold, wrapped in a paper napkin that had soaked through with the grease. Half a biscuit, a little twist of wax paper with salt in it, and I understood sitting there that I was looking at this woman's dinner. That she had made it at home, probably before a double shift, and packed it careful and carried it here, and been saving it for the long, cold hours of a night shift with a closed highway and no customers and nothing to do but scrub a griddle that was already clean. And she gave it to a stranger with $31 in his coat and a dead wife in his chest, because she thought he had nothing. I want to tell you I ate it with grace. I didn't. I ate it like a starving animal, and I was ashamed of that, and I couldn't stop. And somewhere around the second egg my eyes did a thing they hadn't done at the funeral, hadn't done at the hospital, hadn't done once in 11 weeks of me holding the whole business shut like a hand around a wound. They filled up. Right there over a cold egg at a bus depot counter. I turned my face to the window so she wouldn't see, and I watched the ice come down sideways in the parking lot light, and I got myself back under control. And when I turned around, she had very kindly found something to do at the far end of the counter that involved her back being to me for exactly as long as I needed it to be. That's a kind of grace most people don't have, knowing when to look away. "Thank you," I said when I could. It came out too small for what I meant. That was thank you. "It's just eggs," she said, and came back down the counter, and now she did smile, tired and real. "I'm Ruth." "Wade," I said. And I almost added the rest of it, the last name that meant something in that part of the world, the name that was on 140,000 acres and a bank branch and a wing of the hospital where my wife had died. I almost said it out of some reflex of being a man people ought to know. And I stopped, because in that moment I did not want to be that man. That man had money and no wife and no idea how to live. This man had just been fed by a stranger. I liked this man better, so I let her have Wade, just Wade, and I told myself it was humility. It wasn't humility. Not yet. It was hiding. There's a difference, and the difference is most of this story. She got herself a cup of coffee from the pot she kept going for herself, and she came around and sat on the stool one down from mine. And because the highway was closed and the night was long and there was nothing else in the world to do, Ruth talked to me. Not right away. She wasn't a talker by nature. I'd learned that later. That talking was a thing she'd stopped doing much because most of the people who'd wanted to hear from her had wanted something. But there's a certain hour of a certain kind of night when the ice is coming down, and the two of you are the last people awake in a small circle of light, and things get said that daylight would keep quiet. I learned over the next 3 hours more about a stranger than I had learned about most of the men I'd employed for 20 years. I learned she had a boy, 12 years old, named Cody, at home right now with a neighbor woman 2 doors down who watched him for the price of Ruth doing her taxes and fixing her hair. I learned Cody had asthma bad, the kind that landed him in the ER twice a winter, and that the last visit had a bill attached to it that Ruth was paying off at $40 a month and would be, by her own dry calculation, until roughly the day the boy graduated high school. I learned the boy was smart. She lit up when she said it. A whole different woman for about 10 seconds, that he read everything, that he'd taught himself about the stars from a library book and could name constellations she couldn't see the point of, and that she was scared to death of him being smart because smart, where they were, mostly just meant a kid who understood exactly how stuck he was. I learned she worked this counter and cleaned 2 offices in the evenings and picked up Sundays at a nursing home doing hair for the old women, because a lot of them didn't have family come and a set, and a wash made them feel human. And she said that part like it was nothing, like doing free and almost free kindness for dying strangers on her one day off was just a thing a person did. I learned her husband had left, not dramatically. That was almost the worst of it, the way she told it, no fight, no other woman that she knew of, just a man who woke up one day about 4 years back and decided the size of his own life was more than he'd signed up for and drove off in the good truck and mailed a check for a while and then stopped mailing checks. She didn't cry telling it. She'd used up crying on that a long time ago. She just said, some people can't carry what they picked up. And you can't make 'em. You just find out you can carry it yourself, or you find out what happens if you don't, and I couldn't afford to find out that second thing. So... And she turned her coffee cup a quarter turn on the counter, and that was the end of it. I sat there and listened, and I thought about my safe full of ledgers back at the ranch, all those debts crossed out, all those kindnesses paid back, and I realized I was sitting next to a woman who had spent her whole adult life extending credit to a world that had never once paid her back, and who did not appear to be keeping score. She just kept doing it. She'd given a strange man her dinner. She did the dying women's hair for free. She was, as near as I could tell, constitutionally incapable of watching a person suffer within arm's reach without trying to fix some small piece of it. And life had rewarded her for this by taking her husband, breaking her son's lungs, and standing her on concrete for 18 hours a day. And I had 14 rooms and a plane and a dead wife, and I could not have given a stranger a cold egg to save my own soul, because I would have been too busy protecting myself to see that the stranger was hungry. That's what she showed me that first night, though I couldn't have said it out loud. She showed me that I had gotten it exactly backward my whole life. My father's ledger, I'd read it as a lesson about paying debts, about balance, about being an honest man who came out even. And here was Ruth, who came out behind on every single transaction and stayed there on purpose, and she was the richest person I had ever sat next to. It made no sense by any arithmetic I knew. It broke the math. Around 1 in the morning, the coffee ran out and she made more. And around 2, she caught me looking at the bandage on her thumb and told me she'd sliced it on the meat slicer 3 days back. No big deal. She'd butterflied it and taped it and gone back to work because there was no version of events where she took a day off for a thumb. Around 2:30, I finally asked the question I'd been holding. "Ruth," I said, "when I got here, you'd already cashed out the drawer. You could have told me kitchen's closed and left it there. Nobody'd have thought a thing of it. Why'd you give me your supper?" She was quiet a second, wiped a ring off the counter that wasn't there. "My grandmother raised me," she said. "Out past the county line little place, nothing to it, and she had a rule. If somebody's at your table, you feed 'em. Didn't matter if you had it to spare." She said, and here Ruth's voice did something, went down to almost nothing. She said, "Ruthie, the Lord doesn't send you people you can afford. Anybody can feed a guest they've got food for. That's not hospitality, that's just having a party. He sends you the ones you can't afford, that's the test. And you fail it or you pass it in about 2 seconds before you've had time to think, so you'd best already have decided who you are." She looked at me then, straight on. "I decided who I am a long time ago," she said. "It's about the only thing I've got that nobody's been able to take. So, you were at my table, I fed you, that's all it is. I have been told I am a hard man to shame. I built an empire. You don't do that being soft, and I have looked men in the eye and taken things from them that they needed and told myself it was business. I am telling you that a waitress in a pink uniform shamed me down to the foundation with one sentence about her grandmother, and she didn't even know she was doing it. And if she'd known, she'd have been horrified, because shaming a person was the last thing in the world Ruth would ever do on purpose. The sun didn't come up so much as the sky went from black to gray to the color of dishwater, and somewhere out on the highway, the road crews got the glaze knocked off, and a little after 7, the dispatcher stuck his head in to say the north bus would roll at 8:15. Ruth's relief came in, a heavy-set kid named Marcus who called her Miss Ruth and clearly worshipped her, and she took off her apron and got her coat, the same flannel she'd worn all night, and she looked at me one more time. "You gonna be all right, Wade?" she asked, and she meant it. That's the thing you have to understand. This woman with a sick kid and a runaway husband and a thumb she'd butterflied herself, standing in a bus depot after an 18-hour day, was worried about me. And I had a choice right there, the first of several I'd get in this story, and the only one I got completely right. I could have told her the truth. I could have said, "Ruth, I own most of what you can see from the top of the water tower, and I have more money than your whole town will earn in a decade. And I'm going to fix everything for you, the hospital bill, the boys' lungs, the concrete floors, all of it, starting now." I had the power to do it. I could have made a phone call from the depot pay phone and changed her life before the bus left. And it would have been the worst thing I could possibly have done, and some part of me, the part that had watched a herd for 50 years, the part that reads animals and men, knew it, because she hadn't fed me for a reward. She'd fed me because of who she'd decided to be at some kitchen table 30 years ago. And if I'd reached into my coat right then and pulled out the truth and the money, I'd have turned the purest thing she owned into a transaction. I'd have made her right and made her a fool for not knowing and made her supper into an investment that paid off, and it would have ruined it. It would have ruined her, not her life, her. So I didn't. I looked at that good, tired woman and I said, "Yeah, Ruth, I think I'm going to be all right." And for the first time since Alina died saying it, I believed it might be true. She smiled and squeezed my forearm once, the way you'd steady a fence post, and she walked out into the gray morning toward a life I now knew far too much about. And I stood at the window and watched her go small and getting smaller across that Istover parking lot, flannel collar up against the wind, heading home to a sick boy and a neighbor to pay back, and about 4 hours of sleep before she did the whole thing again. I got out my father's ledger. I took the rubber band off, and on a fresh line in my tight little hand, I wrote her name, Ruth, and the name of the depot and the date and what she'd given me. 2 eggs, half a biscuit. And beside it, I did not write paid because it wasn't, and I did not write the amount because there wasn't one. Because for the first time in 50 years, I was holding a debt that money could not touch, and I knew it. I sat back down on the stool with the stuffing coming out. The bus wasn't for another hour. And I started to think. Because here is the thing about being a man who has spent his whole life solving problems with money. When you finally meet a problem that money will only make worse, you don't stop wanting to solve it. You just have to get smart. You have to get patient. You have to become, for maybe the first time in your life, a man who gives the way she gave, without letting the other person see the size of it, without turning it into a debt, without needing to be thanked or known or made even. I did not know yet how I was going to do that. I only knew that I was not going to get back on a bus and disappear into my grief like a stone in a stock tank. Alina was gone, and that was a hole I would carry into the ground. But Ruth was here. Ruth's boy was here. And somewhere in the last 11 hours, without my permission, the animal part of me that had been trying so hard to become nobody had gone and decided to become somebody again, just a different somebody than the one who'd walked in. The dispatcher called the North bus. I let it go without me. The first thing I did wrong, I did within 48 hours, and I did it because I could not sit still. Understand the kind of animal I am. A man doesn't build what I built by waiting. You see a thing that needs doing and you do it, big and fast, and you eat the mistakes because you can afford to, and the doing gets you there before the man who deliberated. That instinct had made me rich, and it had made me, I think, not a very good husband for a lot of years, though Alina had loved me anyway and worn the corners off me slow. And that instinct woke up in a cheap motel 2 towns over where I'd holed up, and it said, in the voice it always used, "You have money. She has a problem money solves. Solve it." So I didn't get back on the bus. I called a man. Not my ranch manager. I still hadn't called him, which I'll come back to, because it was starting to be a problem of its own. I called a lawyer I kept in Amarillo, a discreet one, the kind rich men keep the way they keep a spare key hidden in the barn. I told him about a hospital bill at a particular hospital under a particular woman's name, and I told him I wanted it paid anonymously in full, and I wanted the boy's asthma looked after, a specialist, the good one in Lubbock, everything covered, no name attached. Make it look like a charity. Make it look like a program. Make it look like anything but a man. He said he could do it by Friday. And I hung up the pay phone feeling, for about 90 seconds, the old clean rush of a problem solved. I'd out-clevered the trap. I'd give without being seen. I'd be my father's ledger and Ruth's grandmother both at once, the debt paid, the giver invisible. I actually smiled at the motel wall. Then I sat down on the bed and I thought it all the way through, the way I hadn't at the phone, and the smile went off my face like water off a slick rock. Picture it from her side. A woman who has been abandoned by the one man who was supposed to carry his share, who has learned down in her marrow that the world does not send help. A woman whose entire dignity, the only thing nobody's been able to take, is built on the fact that she carries it herself. And one Tuesday a letter arrives. The hospital bill is gone, paid by persons unknown. A stranger has reached into her life and moved a mountain she'd been moving $40 at a time. And she doesn't know who, and she can't say thank you, and she can't say no, and she can't ever be sure it won't come with a hook in it later. You think that's a gift? I know what that is. I've been on the receiving end of anonymous money exactly once in my life, when a rival bought up a note I was carrying in a bad year and forgave it to make me beholden, and I have never in 30 years stopped watching that man's hands. Anonymous power dropped into a person's life does not feel like grace. It feels like being watched. It feels like someone above you moving pieces you can't see. And for a woman who has fought her whole life to not be small, it is the cruelest possible thing dressed up as the kindest. It would tell her the truth she most feared, which is that she couldn't carry it after all, that she'd needed rescuing all along, that the carrying she was so proud of was a thing that could be lifted off her by a stranger with a checkbook whenever a stranger with a checkbook felt like it. I'd have paid her bill and stolen the one thing she owned outright. I called the lawyer back. It was near midnight and he was not pleased and I did not care. "Kill it," I said. "All of it, don't pay the bill, don't call the specialist, don't do a thing." "You sure it's all ready?" "Kill it," I said. "And Marcus," that was his name too, the lawyer, funny thing. "If you ever move money into that woman's life without me telling you the exact how of it, I'll find another lawyer and I'll tell this one why." Then I sat in the dark of that motel and I did a thing I had not done in a long, long time, which was admit that I did not know how to do something. I knew how to give. God knows I'd given buildings, scholarships, a hospital wing with a brass plaque and my name on it big enough to read from the parking lot. I had never once in my life given the way Ruth gave. Small, close, in a way that left the other person taller instead of shorter. I didn't have the muscle for it. I'd let it wither. And I understood, sitting there, that I was going to have to learn it the way you learn anything at 58, which is badly and slowly, and by getting it wrong in front of people. So I made a decision that a smarter man would have made in 5 minutes, and it took me 2 days. I decided I wasn't going to fix Ruth's life. I was going to be in it. I went back. I told the motel I'd keep the room by the week, and I paid cash, which cost me nearly everything I had on me. And I called my manager at last. A short call. I told him I was fine. I was taking time. I'd be gone a while longer, handle the fall works, and no, don't send anybody, and no, I don't want the plane. He'd known me 30 years, and he heard something in my voice he didn't have a name for, and he let it go. God bless him. And then I walked the 1.5 miles back to that bus depot in a wind that had turned from ice to just cold. And I sat down at Ruth's counter at the start of her shift like a man with nowhere better to be, which was the truest thing about me. She was surprised to see me. Then she was, I think, a little glad, and then she was suspicious of being glad, which is what a woman learns after a man drives off in the good truck. All of that went across her face in about 1.5 seconds, and then she poured me a coffee I hadn't asked for and said, "Bus break down again." "Something like that," I said. "Figured I'd stay in the area a while. Got any work around here a fella could do." Now that was half a lie and half the truest plan I ever made. Because here's what I'd figured out in the dark. The only honest way I was going to get money into that woman's life was to earn my way close enough that she'd let me help the way you let a friend help. Small, mutual, face-to-face, a thing between equals. And to do that I had to stop being a millionaire with a secret and become, for real for a while, a man who worked. Not pretend worked. Worked. I'd owned 140,000 acres for so long I'd half forgot. I'd built the first fence on the first section with these hands. Back when they were young. And my father beside me saying, "Tighter, Wade. A loose fence is a lie you tell your neighbor." Ruth looked at me a long moment. "You know ranch work." "I know it," I said, and did not say how well. Because old man Petrie's short-handed and too proud to say so and too broke to pay much. His hired man's back went out. He's got cattle to move before the next front and nobody to move 'em. She said it like she was thinking out loud, and then she caught herself doing me a kindness, finding me work. And I watched her decide it was allowed, because it wasn't money, it was just word of a job, and word of a job is the kind of thing you give a stranger without shame. "It don't pay hardly anything," she warned. "That's all right," I said. "I'm cheap." I hired on with Petrie the next morning for $40 a day and a cot in his bunkhouse. And I will tell you that I have signed contracts worth more than that town's entire assessed value, and not one of them gave me what those 3 weeks gave me. Petrie was 71 and stubborn as a fence post, and he'd worked his own place with one hired man since Nixon, and he did not know who I was, and he worked me like a rented mule, and it was the best thing that had happened to me since before Alina got sick. My hands cracked and bled and then went to leather. My back informed me nightly of every year I'd spent behind a desk. I moved cattle in cold that got into your teeth, and I fixed fence with numb fingers, and I slept the black, dreamless sleep of a body that has spent everything it had. And for whole hours at a stretch I did not think about my dead wife, and when I did think about her it didn't fold me in half the way it had. Grief you can outrun for a minute at a time behind a running steer. It's not a cure, but a minute at a time, strung together, is how you get through a day. And every few days, when Petrie could spare me, I walked into town and sat at Ruth's counter. I want to be careful here about what this was and what it wasn't. It was not a romance. I want to say that plainly because I know how these stories usually go, and I know what you might be waiting for, and it would cheapen her and cheapen Alina both to pretend I walked into that depot 11 weeks widowed and fell for a waitress. I didn't. Alina was a wound that was going to be with me the rest of my life, and I told Ruth about her, eventually told her I'd lost my wife, told her it was recent, told her more than I'd told anyone on a slow Thursday over the third coffee, and Ruth did not try to fix it or hurry it or hand me a Bible verse. She just listened, and at the end she said, 40 years, soft, like she was setting the number down careful. That's not something you get over. That's something you get used to carrying. Different thing. And she'd said the same word to me she'd said about her husband, carry, and I understood that this was Ruth's whole theology, right there. That life is a set of weights, and you don't get to put them down, you only get stronger or you don't, and the getting stronger is the only mercy on offer. So no, not romance. What it was the slow building of the first real friendship I'd made in maybe 30 years, since I got rich enough that every new person who smiled at me wanted something. Ruth wanted nothing. She thought I was a broke ranch hand a step above homeless. There was nothing I could do for her and nothing she could get from me, and so, for the first time in 3 decades, I got to find out if a person would sit and talk to me for the pleasure of it, and she did, and it healed something in me I hadn't even known was broken. I met the boy on the second week. Cody came to the depot after school some days because the neighbor woman worked afternoons, and he'd sit at the end of the counter and do his homework and drink the flat Sprite his mother let him have as a treat. He was small for 12, narrow through the chest, the asthma, I figured, robbing a growing body of the oxygen it needed to grow, with his mother's brown eyes and a seriousness that didn't belong on a face that young. And he had, folded into the front of his math book, a diagram of the winter constellations that he'd drawn himself, careful, labeled, and I made the mistake of glancing at it, and the boy caught me and went stiff. The way a smart kid goes stiff when an adult notices the thing he loves, braced for the adult to say something stupid about it. "That's Orion coming up wrong," I said before I could stop myself. "Belt's tilted. This time of year off this latitude he comes up on his side, then stands up as the night goes." The boy stared at me. "You know the stars." "I've spent about 10,000 nights outside," I said. "You learn 'em whether you want to or not. Mostly you learn the ones that tell you the time, so you know how long till you can quit." And that was it. That was the whole seduction. Cody decided I was worth talking to, and Cody, it turned out, did not have a soul in his life who knew or cared about the one thing that lit him up. His mother loved him fierce, but the stars were Greek to her. His teacher had 30 kids. His father was a check that had stopped coming. And here was a broke old cowboy who'd slept under the sky 10,000 times, and could point to a smear of light, and tell him it was a nursery where stars got born, and the boy latched on like a calf that's found the bucket. I taught him things. Real things the practical navigator's sky my father taught me, how to find north without a compass, how to read weather in a ring around the moon, how to guess the hour off the wheel of the dipper. And the boy taught me back, out of his library books, the enormous things, the physics of it, the distances so big the numbers stopped meaning anything, and I sat at that counter and let a 12-year-old with bad lungs explain the death of stars to me, and I thought, this is the smartest child I have ever met, and if the world stays the shape it is, he will spend his life on concrete like his mother, and it will be a crime that no court will ever hear. That's when the wanting to fix it came roaring back, and this time I was ready for it, and I held it. Not yet. Not like that. Get close, earn it, give small. I gave him a book. Used, $3 from the town's one thrift, a beat-up college astronomy text with half the cover gone. $3 was a gift a broke ranch hand could give without it being strange, and the boy held it like it was made of gold, and Ruth watched him hold it and then looked at me across the counter with an expression I couldn't read and didn't like the weight of. She was starting to wonder about me. I could feel it. A broke drifter is a simple thing. A broke drifter who knows navigation stars and buys a kid a college textbook and talks like he's read a few in his day. That's a shape that doesn't quite close. Ruth was too smart and too burned to let a shape not close around her son. She was going to figure me out. It was only a question of when and how bad it went when she did. It went bad on a Tuesday, and it went bad because of the boy's lungs, and it very nearly took the whole thing down. It was the coldest night yet. A blue norther had come through at dusk and dropped the temperature 40 degrees in an hour, the kind of cold that cracks stock tanks, and the depot was near empty, and Cody was at his end of the counter with the $3 book, and I was at mine with a coffee, and Ruth was moving between us and the griddle, and I heard the boys breathing change before either of them did. It's a sound you learn on a ranch. A calf with the pneumonia, an old horse with the heaves, that reach, that pull, air fighting to get past a door that's closing. Cody's breath got a whistle in the bottom of it, and then a second whistle, and then his shoulders came up around his ears, the way a body does when it's using muscles that aren't meant for breathing to breathe anyway, and Ruth turned around and the color went out of her face. "Where's your inhaler?" she said, already moving. Not a question, a drill they'd run before. "Backpack," Cody got out, and the word cost him half his air, and Ruth had the backpack upside down on the counter, and everything out of it in about 2 seconds, books, papers, the star diagram, a pencil case, and no inhaler, because the inhaler was at home on the kitchen table where a 12-year-old had set it down that morning, and I watched Ruth's whole life arrive in her eyes at once. The ER twice a winter, the bill she was still paying, the specialist she couldn't afford, and now a blue norther and a boy turning gray at the mouth, and the nearest hospital 22 miles up a highway that had iced over at dusk. And here is the moment I have played back more than any other in this whole story, more even than the eggs. Because I had, at that moment, in my coat, on a scrap of paper, the private cell number of the best pulmonologist in Lubbock, whom my money had put through the last of his training years ago, and who would answer my call at any hour of any night for the rest of his life, and send a helicopter if I asked. I had in my name an account that could have chartered that helicopter in the time it took to dial. I had all the power in the world to save this child, right now, this instant, and using 1 ounce of it would blow my cover to atoms and turn me from Wade the ranch hand into what I really was in front of the one woman on earth whose good opinion I had come to need more than air. And I did not hesitate. I want that on the record. Whatever I got wrong before and after, this I got right, and I got it right without thinking, which my father would have said is the only kind of right that counts, because you fail or pass the test in about 2 seconds before you've had time to think, so you'd best already have decided who you are. I decided. Truck, I said, already up, already moving. Petrie's truck's out front, I've got the keys, it's 4-wheel drive. Ruth, get his coat. Cody, I got down to the boy's eye level and I made my voice the voice you use on a spooked horse, low and slow and absolutely certain, the voice that says nothing bad is happening even though everything bad is happening. Hey, look at me. You're gonna breathe out longer than you breathe in, you hear? Long, slow out. Like blowing through a straw, out longer than in. We got all night. You and me are gonna count it. And I got him breathing to a count, while Ruth got his coat on him with hands that were shaking. And I did not let the boy see me be afraid because a scared kid can't breathe, and a boy who thinks the grown-ups have it handled has a chance. And we got him into the middle of the bench seat of Petrie's old truck with his mother's arm around him. And I drove 22 miles of iced highway in the pitch black at a speed I had no business driving, both hands white on the wheel. Talking the whole way in that same low certain voice, out longer than in. That's it, you're doing it. Look at Orion out the windshield there, he's on his side. We'll get you fixed and you can tell me why by summer. And beside me a mother prayed with no words, just breath. Matching her breathing to her son's to give him something to hold on to. And I have driven Ferraris on private tracks. And I have never in my life driven anything the way I drove that beat-to-hell ranch truck full of everything that mattered. We made the ER at 11:40. They took him back fast. A gray-lipped asthmatic boy jumps the line everywhere in the world. And then there was the thing that happens in ER waiting rooms at midnight, the terrible arithmetic of hope stretched over cheap chairs. And Ruth and I sat under the buzzing lights, and she gripped my forearm the way she'd gripped it that first morning. Except now it was both hands, and she wasn't steadying a fence post. She was holding on to the only other adult who'd been in that truck, and I let her. And I did not tell her that I could have had a helicopter, and the not telling was the hardest silence I have ever kept. At 2 in the morning, a doctor came out and said the words, "He's stable. We caught it. He's going to be fine. We'll keep him tonight." And Ruth folded forward over her own knees and made a sound I won't try to describe. And I put my hand on her back the way you'd gentle any suffering creature. And I looked up over her bent back at the fluorescent lights, and I thought about Alina, who no doctor had ever come out and said those words about, and I let myself, for one selfish second, be glad it was somebody's child getting saved, tonight even if it couldn't have been my wife. And then, an hour later, in the gray hollow ebb after the crisis when people say true things because they're too emptied out to guard themselves, Ruth said the thing that ended the first half of my second life. She was looking at the vending machine, not at me. Her voice was flat with exhaustion. "That doctor," she said, "the one that came out, when he saw you sitting there he stopped for just a second, like he almost knew you." She turned her head and looked at me then, and her brown eyes were red-rimmed and steady, and they went all the way through me. "And you drove that road tonight like you knew it, like you'd driven it 100 times, and you talked to my boy like—" She stopped, started again. "You buy him a college book on $3 a day. You know doctors by their faces. You show up out of nowhere, and you don't hardly touch your pay, and you sit at my counter like you got all the time in the world when a man that broke ought to be scared to death about tomorrow." She wasn't angry. That was the worst of it. She was too tired to be angry. She just needed to know. "Wade," she said, "who are you?" And I sat there in the 2 a.m. light of a hospital where I had, unknown to her, paid for the wing we were sitting in, next to a woman who had shared her last meal with me because she thought I had nothing, whose son I had just helped carry back from the edge. And I understood that the moment I had been managing and delaying and dreading for 3 weeks had arrived on its own schedule the way the important moments always do, not when you're ready, but when the truth gets tired of waiting. I opened my mouth. End of part 2. That lands us right on the reveal, Wade cornered by the one question he can't sidestep, in the worst possible place for it, having just earned exactly the trust he's about to detonate. Part 3 is the reveal itself and its real cost. How Ruth takes it, why the money is still the wrong tool, and how a man finally learns to give the way she gave, small, close, and without turning her into someone who was rescued. I'll bring the ending in on the emotional register the piece has been building toward, with the ambiguity you asked for at the close. I told her the truth. Not all at once, the truth that sighs doesn't come all at once. It comes in pieces, each one landing before the next, and you watch it land. I started with the smallest true thing and worked up. My name's Wade, I said. That part's real, the rest of it, Ruth, I haven't lied to you. But I've let you believe something, and letting a person believe something is its own kind of lie, and you've earned better than that from me, so. I turned my coffee cup a quarter turn on the little waiting room table, and I noticed I'd picked up her gesture without meaning to, and I set my hands flat instead. I'm not a broke ranch hand. I own a ranch. I own a lot of ranch, and a lot besides. The doctor stopped because he knows my face. My money paid for the last part of his training. This hospital we're sitting in, the wing your boy's asleep in, my name's on the outside of it. Cut in stone over the door. You walked past it tonight and didn't look up because why would you? I watched it land. I watched her go very still, the way a person goes still on ice when they feel it shift. 11 weeks ago my wife died, I said, and my voice did the thing and I let it. 40 years, and I had all the money in the world and it didn't buy me one more afternoon with her, and I couldn't stand to be in my own house, so I put on a barn coat and I left the credit cards in a drawer and I got on a bus because I wanted, God help me, I wanted to find out what I was worth with none of it. And I ended up in your depot with $31 and a hole in my chest. And you looked at me and figured I was a man at the bottom of something, and you gave me your supper. The vending machine hummed. Somewhere down the hall a monitor beeped its patient, steady beep. And I thought, that's her boy's heart. That's a machine my money helped by counting out the beats of a heart I helped carry in here. And she doesn't know it, and I have to tell her. And it is going to cost me everything I've built in 3 weeks, and I have earned the bill. Your eggs, I said, were the first thing anybody gave me in 11 weeks that didn't want a piece of me back. You didn't know who I was. That's the only reason it was real. And I have wanted every single day since to fix your life, pay the hospital, the boy's specialist, your husband's checks he never sent, all of it. I could do it before breakfast and never feel it. And I didn't. You want to know why I didn't? She didn't say anything. She was looking at me like I'd turned into a stranger in the chair, which I suppose I had. Or like she'd turned into a fool, which she was frightened she had. And it was that second fear I had to kill before it took root, because that fear would end us. Because the day I met you, I said, you told me about your grandmother, and you said she taught you the Lord doesn't send you the people you can afford. He sends you the ones you can't. And you said you decided who you were a long time ago, and it was the one thing nobody'd ever managed to take from you. And I have taken a lot of things from a lot of people in my life, Ruth. I'm good at it. But I looked at you and I knew that if I reached into my coat and pulled out my checkbook, I'd be taking that. The one thing. I'd be telling you that you couldn't carry it after all, that a stranger with money could just lift it off you whenever he felt like being generous. And that would have made your whole life a thing that happened to you instead of a thing you did. So I didn't. I kept my mouth shut and I hired on with Petrie for 40 a day, and I froze my hands off moving another man's cattle, because I would rather have earned my way to your counter as a friend than bought my way into your life as a savior. A savior turns you into somebody who got saved. A friend just sits at the counter. Her jaw was working, her eyes were bright and hard. And tonight, she said finally, and her voice had an edge in it now, exhaustion burned off by something colder. You could have saved him faster, couldn't you? You said you know that, doctor. You've got a helicopter, people like you have helicopters. I've got the doctor's private number in my coat, I said, because I would not lie to her now, not even the kind lie. I could have had a helicopter on the depot roof in 20 minutes. And you drove. And I drove. You gambled my son's life on a truck on an iced road, she said, standing up now, and it came out of her like something that had been building the whole 3 weeks and finally had a shape to pour into. So you wouldn't have to tell me who you were. And there it was. The heaviest thing in the story, the thing I have never fully forgiven myself for even though I'd do it again. And I made myself sit in it and not defend it, because she was right and she was wrong and both at once. and she deserved to swing before she heard which. No, I said, quiet. I gambled that a truck would get there because a truck would get there, and it did. The helicopter's 40 minutes to spin up and clear a landing, Ruth. I did that math in the first 2 seconds. 22 miles of highway beat it, and I knew the road was drivable because Petrie's man had come in on it at 9. If the truck hadn't been the faster bet, I'd have blown my cover to atoms and made the call and never thought twice, and you'd have known everything an hour sooner and hated me an hour sooner, and I'd have taken it. The cover didn't cost your boy 1 second tonight. I promise you that on my wife's name, and I don't spend that name. She stood there breathing hard, and I watched her run the math herself. She was quicker than me, watched her walk it back through the timing and check it and find it held, and watched the accusation go out of her like air out of a tire, slow, because being furious at me was easier than the thing underneath it, and the thing underneath it was worse. She sat back down, she put her face in her hands, and when she spoke it was through her fingers, and it was the true thing, the one she'd been keeping under the anger. I gave you my supper, she said, and her shoulders went. I sat there and told you about Cody's bills and and David leaving. I told you things I don't tell anybody, and the whole time you were a rich man watching me be poor, studying it, like she couldn't find the word or found it and couldn't stand it. You know how that feels, to find out the person you were kind to could have been kind back 1,000 times over and just sat there, letting you spend what little you had on him. On his coffee, he could have bought the whole station. And that was the real bill, and it was worse than I'd braced for. And I had no clever answer because there wasn't one. Because she was exactly right about the shape of it, even though she was wrong about the heart of it. And the only thing I had was the truth, so I gave her the truth naked with nothing on it. Yes, I said, I know exactly how it feels because it's how I felt for 30 years, everybody being kind to me for what I could do back. You're the first person since I got rich who was kind to me for nothing. And I couldn't tell you because the second I told you, you'd have started wondering if the eggs were a good investment. And they weren't an investment. They were the realest thing anybody's done for me in my adult life, and I would rather you be sitting here right now hating me for hiding than sitting here doing the arithmetic on your own grandmother's kindness. I'd rather be the villain than turn your eggs into a transaction. I hid because it was the only way to keep the one true thing true. That's not a good reason. It's just the actual one. We sat there a long time. The monitor beeped down the hall. 2 a.m. became 3. And somewhere in there, I don't know the exact minute, she stopped being a poor woman who'd been fooled by a rich man, and I stopped being a rich man managing a poor woman, and we went back to being the two people who'd sat up all night in a bus depot while the ice came sideways, because that had been real too, and no amount of money or hiding could make it not have happened. You can't unshare a supper. It's the one thing that stays given. David used to say things, she said finally, tired, not to me exactly, about how he was gonna fix everything. Big, he had big fixes, that's how I know the difference. She looked at me. You didn't fix anything. You froze your hands off and bought my kid a $3 book and drove a truck through the ice and kept your mouth shut so I could keep the one thing I've got. A long breath. That's not a David thing. David would have paid the bill to feel good and been gone by spring. So, she wiped her face with the heel of her hand, the bandaged thumb. I don't know what to do with you, Wade, but I don't think you're a liar. I think you're a man who didn't know how to give without breaking something and figured out the only way he could. A ghost of the old dry look, which is about the saddest rich man problem I ever heard. And I laughed, we both did, the awful cracked laugh of people who have been up all night on the edge of something. And that laugh was the bridge back, and we walked across it. Here is how it ended, and it did not end the way the money wanted it to. I did not pay her hospital bill. I want you to sit with that, because it's the whole point, and it's the thing everyone I've ever told this to argues with me about. I had the power to erase every dollar she owed, and I never spent 1 cent of it that way, because I finally understood, all the way down, that a gift she couldn't refuse and couldn't repay would be a chain no matter how soft the gold, and Ruth had worn enough chains. What I did instead took longer and cost me more, and I mean cost me more of the thing that actually hurt to spend, which was myself. I bought Petrie's ranch. Quiet fare, more than fair. The old man was going under and too proud to say it, and I let him keep his house and his name on the gate, and I took over the books. And he thinks to this day he did me a favor, and I have never told him different, and that's a whole other ledger entry. And then I did a thing I could do honestly, out in the open, as an employer and not a savior. I offered Ruth a job. Bookkeeper and household manager for the operation, salary that a bookkeeper honestly earns, insurance, real insurance. the kind that has a pulmonologist in the network, so that the boy's lungs became a thing that was simply covered, the way it's covered for the daughters of men like me, not as charity but as the ordinary dignity of a person with a good job. She earned every dollar. She was better at the books than the man I'd been paying triple. It was not a gift. It was a wage. She could quit any Tuesday and take it with her and owe me nothing, and that a thing she could walk away from was the only kind of help her dignity could hold. She saw exactly what I was doing. Of course she did. She was too smart not to, and the first week she sat me down and said, "This job real, or is this you paying my hospital bill sideways where I can't say no to it?" And I looked her in the eye and I said, "It's real. You do the work, you get the wage. I get the better end of the deal because you're worth more than I'm paying. If you ever feel like it's charity, you walk out that door and I'll write you the best reference in the Panhandle." It's a job, Ruth. I just made sure it was a job that came with a doctor for your boy, because I could, and because you'd have done the same for me if the money'd been the other way round, and you know it. And she thought about it hard for a long minute, because she was checking it for hooks the way I'd checked that forgiven note for 30 years. And she found none, because there were none, because I'd built it on purpose with no hooks in it, and she said, "Okay," just that. "Okay." And she took the job. The bill she paid off herself. $40 a month became $80 when the wage came in, and she cleared it 11 months later. And the day she made the last payment, she came into the ranch office and told me, not because I'd asked, but because she wanted one person on earth to know she'd finished carrying it. And I said, "Good." And I did not say I could have done that in 10 seconds a year ago, because the whole point, the entire point of everything, was that she did it and I didn't, and the doing was hers, and I'd have died before I stole it. Cody's under the sky most nights now. There's no light for 40 miles out at that ranch, and the boy has a telescope. That one I gave him openly for a birthday, a thing a man is allowed to give his bookkeeper's kid, and he's going to be something, not a rancher. Something with the enormous numbers in it. He explained to me last spring how the light from a star can be older than the star, how you can be looking at a thing that isn't there anymore, still burning across the whole width of the dark just to reach your eye. And I thought about a leaner, and I thought about a plate of cold eggs, and I thought that just about everything that ever mattered to me was light from something that isn't there anymore, still arriving. I never crossed Ruth's name out of my father's ledger. It's the only entry in 50 years I've left open on purpose, because paid was always the wrong word for it. You don't pay back the person who taught you the thing you'd built your whole life getting wrong. My father wrote paid when a debt was made even. This one I'll carry to the ground, glad to, the way she taught me you carry the weights that matter. Not a debt. A direction. Every day I try to give the way she gave me supper, small, close, and in a way that leaves the other fellow taller than I found him, and every day I fall a little short, and the falling short is the ledger staying open, and I've made my peace with that. She still doesn't fully understand what she did. I've tried to tell her, and she waves it off. It was just eggs, weighed, and maybe that's the last true thing about her. That a woman can save a man's whole life over a bus depot counter and go to her grave believing it was just eggs.